All right, welcome to episode 98 of the Redacted Culture Cast. The subject of the day is going to be suppressors, but as much as that sounds like an item-based discussion, I'm curious and encouraged by where this could go. And while we've had people come on the show who talk about radios, and we've had people who talk about small level manufacturing, we haven't had anybody quite with this guest's background in specifically suppressors. And so I'd like you to introduce yourself. Please go ahead.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Jake Kunsky. I've been invited on the show. I appreciate you having me on. Um, and I am a suppressor manufacturer. Company I do it for and with and am a part of is JK Armament. So my name's in the name of the company, Jake Kunsky. And yeah, we've um, been manufacturing our own suppressors since about October of last year, but been in the industry for over 10 years now, creating different weapons and suppressors and accessories in the firearms industry. So,
Well, so here's the ulterior motive that I have is that I like to have guests introduce themselves, so I make sure I get to pronounce their name correctly. Because sometimes you get those, you're like, am I saying this right, Don? And then if I butcher it, it's on me. So, but we've had
yeah,
conversations in the past. We've met at SHOT Show, and I've actually worked with some of your. Well, they weren't really called suppressors at the time. They were your kits. And so like the world has changed since I was introduced to you, and you kind of shook up, in my world at least, you shook up the kind of the idea of suppressors and possession a number of years ago through these kind of DIY kits. And how would you class how were they classified? And could you give me kind of a little bit of that story on how you got started in that idea, where it led to, and where you're at now?
yeah, really, that was a whole separate thing we did in the past, but it was based off of kind of suppressor evolution and holes in the system, and that was classified as a solvent trap, made to clean your weapon. Um, if someone decided to convert it to anything else other than that, then that was between them, God, and the ATF, is what we always said. Um, and then anything from a pop can to some pipe from Home Depot can be legally converted into a suppressor with a Form 1 through the ATF. And that's kind of what that whole concept was about.
Yeah, I like it. For me, I saw it as a very effective use of knowing how the environment functions, knowing the equipment, knowing things, knowing how people use stuff. And so it fit in that category of a sort of an innovation that was an abstract object. I thought of it as really neat, as in like you provided a tool that people could use, and then if they so chose of their own volition to use it in other ways, like you're not that's how people function. It's really a liberty focused mindset of like it is the actions of the individual which are under scrutiny, not the hidden intent that fits somewhere in the woodwork. And i think I think quite a few Americans, especially Americans, are trying to figure out how do we get back to those days where the individual is both sovereign over their decisions, but then they're only responsible for their own, and you can't like string together all these things.
Absolutely. I think you said it very well there. And the liberty is up to them, and the freedom is up to the individual. And as soon as they try to throw everyone in one big box and mix them all together, it just doesn't work. That's why we have states. That's why we have counties. Um, we can have different rules that apply to our areas, and a lack of rules that we don't need in our areas. And we have that choice to live where we want to live.
Hmm. There seems to be like a conflict. There seems to be a conflict between it's not exactly libertarian, but this liberty focused mindset of let people be people, which seems to somehow be in conflict with something that seems to use similar language, which is, I think, betraying of its own product, and that would be multiculturalism, which seems to be more of that putting people into a box and forcing them into some sort of compliance, as opposed to allowing them to do it voluntarily through a rights-based system. And it can sound a little bit, it sounds like political philosophy because it is, but it's interesting to see that in the gun debate and the gun conversation world, there was this old motif that everybody wanted safety. We just had different methods of getting there. And I think we're well past that point. I think that conversation is no longer relevant. But when it comes to like pseudo-libertarianism versus authoritarian multiculturalism, both sides of this political and social conversation seem to be at least signaling that they want the same thing, and that's something more like liberty and freedom, but it's not producing that on both ends. And so
unfortunately not. Yeah, not at this point.
So if you could help me out here, my experience with suppressors was very typical for a person of my background. Never saw anything about them except for movies and video games, went in the military, went into special operations, used them a bunch, but I used two models, which was an old Knights Armament version that had the honeycomb exterior.
Yep, the heat shroud.
Yep. And then I'm pretty sure, and then I used another one by Knights that was on an M110, the SAS. Yep. And so
integrated. Yep.
So I had a very limited experience with suppressors as far as a design concept until I got out of the military, and then I started encountering more and more. But this was still in like 2013 timeframe where they were such a new thing for the civilian market as far as a trend. And now they've become so much more common, but I have my small window, and I'd like to hear from your side of like coming from a being on the manufacturing side. How have you observed the application culture, even the world of using suppressors on firearms change in the time that you've been involved, both as an individual manufacturer and then all of the other assets that you've been participating in?
So no, that's a great question. It kind of brings me back to my time in the military and in special operations as well. And, being issued was my first exposure. I'd never shot suppressed until I was in the military. And it's kind of interesting. When I go back to that time frame, the first thing that comes to my mind is a lot of my hunting friends, or people that were really into guns, when I'd come home from a deployment or something, would ask me, "So what kind of ammunition you guys using?" That was kind of a open question. And for me and a lot of the guys at work, we'd say the ones with the green tips. That was about how much I knew about it. It's 5.56. It's got a green tip. That was about the extent. And that example, coming out of that and coming into the civilian sector and seeing, becoming a reloader and looking at a 5.56 projectile, and then figuring out, oh wow, it's like a 223, and there's probably, at this point, I don't even know the number, 200 to 500 different projectiles you could put in it, not just a green one, right? I think that was kind of how suppressors were the same. It's like, well, what suppressor do you use? I'm like, it's this long and it's got 3 different colors of paint on it. I don't even know what it is, right? But I like it. It makes my gun a little dirtier. I have a little stuff in the face, little gas in the face, things like that. But I liked shooting suppressed and having that ability to. My thing, I guess, my biggest gain out of it was command and control and saving my hearing. We could still talk, right? It wasn't so. When we went loud, it wasn't so loud. And I had that drastic comparison from the first deployment I went on was with the regular Army, 3rd ACR. And we did the invasion of Iraq, and we didn't have any suppressors. So going from nothing to having something was a huge change. Enough to where I was like, this thing's cool. but still not piecing it all together, right? And like, well, what does this thing do? And it's a tool at that point, right? It's on there. It already came on there. So yeah, just kind of that was kind of like getting my feet wet in it, and then you're right. I mean, at that point in time, I mean, we're talking '03. This 03, 04, 05, 06. Those are clear to '08 was my main deployment years. Suppressors didn't really exist that much outside of the military. Law enforcement maybe had a handful, maybe on some bolt guns, but civilian use. It was more of a something cool, maybe a couple guys had in town as a hobby. It was a hobbyist thing. I really feel like at the time, or they did see it in a movie and they wanted one, right? There was people chasing that, and the other day we were talking to Dr. Phil Dater, and that's what got him. If you know him, he's godfather of suppressors, we say in modern day suppression. He's 86 now, I believe. Good friend of mine, and he started a company called Gym Tech, and but he got into him from a movie. He watched it on a movie. He was going through a divorce, and he was a doctor for the Air Force, and he bought himself a gift because he was going through a hard time, right? And he went out and bought a gun with a suppressor on it. And then that's all it took, right? After that, he started developing suppressors and making them better. For me, it was the military, my exposure and my lack of hearing now, and all my friends' hearing is really what drove me to get into it. And entering it was interesting. There was a handful of companies, not many, mainly Gym Tech back then, and a bunch of small other, um, basically garage sized companies, maybe in their back room, or making some very crude models that, were getting by with like sub guns and rimfire. Those were really common back then because they're fairly easy to suppress. And I felt like that was the main area that was getting suppressed. Um, yeah, and then the war effort drives the gun industry, right? So we're in two wars, right? We're in Afghanistan, we're in Iraq, and you just watch anything that had to do with um, modernizing weapons, from sight packages to lasers to suppressors to butt stocks, evolve and change and grow, and they moved quickly, right? I mean, and so suppressors were right in that. They were right in that deal, and then all the civilians wanted a piece of that, right? They got their AR-15 or their M4 or whatever you want to call it, and they wanted a suppressor, and there was a piece of that. There's more people than ever wanted to get in on it, and then you quickly get to what are the rules and regulations? How do I get one? You know, I think the first ones we seen outside of military use that were really trying to hit a niche market. I'm gonna go back. I remember the hot thing being, at that time, the most common barrel you could buy was a 14 and a half inch because M4s had them, right? Wasn't legal length. So I think the starting point there was the pin and welding of suppressor ready mounts, muzzle devices. That's where people started, right? They'd pin and weld a suppressor mount. It got them to that legal length. And then when they bought a suppressor, it was considered the one stamp upper, right? They only had to get a stamp for that suppressor and not for an SBR. But that kept them at their shortest overall length. That was probably the first I seen in the suppressor side on, 5.56 specific. but that seemed to be the hot item. That's what people wanted. That was the new thing. I feel like the 22, rimfire subgun things were floating around out there. You could find an option through a handful of companies, but now it was, how do I suppress this weapon that the war fighters are carrying every day? And I want one, and I want to suppress it. And so I watched that evolve. Um, and shortly in that, or right in that time frame, you're seeing braces come out. Right, that's when the pistol idea came about. Well, I want this shorter. That's, you fix a problem. I always say you fix a problem and you create a problem. So everyone hung a can on the end of their 16-inch overall length 5.56 upper, and pretty soon, they're carrying around an M16 again. And so everyone wants to go shorter, right? That's the American way. Like, how can I get this shorter? How can I get my overall length down? They find out it's going to take another stamp. It's going to take an SBR stamp, right? So another $200 and a different barrel. And so I kind of watched that brace thing happen. And I was involved with Maxim at the time, Maxim Defense. I helped develop their brace and their buttstock. We worked together on that. And later I ended up going to work for them full time and developing the PDX for Maxim Defense. And but that's kind of what I seen happen. So that's kind of the phase I remember back in those days, going from military to, hey, the pin and weld thing, to mounting them. Man, this seems too long. Hey, how do we go shorter? You see the evolution of the SBR, which wasn't really working. So they went to a pistol really quick, um, which is where the braces kicked in. And now we're coming full circle to what's this next phase look like, right?
Yeah, so I looked at the innovation of the brace causing the interest in shorter barrels, but you described it as the interest in shorter barrels led to the development of the brace.
I believe so. So when I developed the solvent traps, if you know my roots, I helped develop the brace and that stock. So when that first came about, the pistol concept, you'd buy an AR-15 that had just the buffer tube on it, and you couldn't attach a stock to it. It was just a tube, and it was really cheap. And I'm gonna call it a little bit like do it yourself, right? DIY, like you said. Um, Quickly, it evolved to, hey, can we put a cheek rest on it? That was the first thing I seen, right? I was like, well, and then can we put like a flat piece on the back? And like, it's evolving quickly. Um, and kind of the way I like to do things in my development and design is like, okay, if this is a thing and you can make this a pistol, let's make the best brace that you can. That's kind of how that happened. And it was me and a few other guys that got together and built that. And SB was part of it. SB Tactical, which they're still flying the flag. They're fighting the fight. They're number one in the gate. Good on them. Maxim Defense was right there, and me and even a couple other guys that worked at Gym Tech at the time helped get that where it is today. That's how that was evolved. So that kind of gives you a little history of how I got into the solvent trap thing. Because again, there was some out there, they were really hokey. And then we said, well, how do we do this best? Right? How do we bring it to the best level? But you see the common trend, and everything we're talking about here is usually driven by the ATF or compliance, right? What can we do inside of this box that they're putting us in? And that's what drives a lot of that innovation, and what makes people chase different things, I feel like. So
if we were to have essentially a magical moment where at least two things were taken off the NFA list, and that'd be SBRs, which the brace ruling shows that the distinction between an 11-inch and a 16-inch AR it doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. It's arbitrary for sure.
It completely doesn't matter. Lethality is actually down because you have a shorter barrel. So
yeah, and that's like the terminal ballistics or the ballistics of the projectile change, and they're not as effective. And then you have all these other things that go into it. But I think even when it comes to the application and the use of it, the difference, the distinction between a longer barrel and a shorter barrel doesn't really mean much when it comes to crime, specifically that type of violent crime that's going to be an issue. What it does do is it puts an additional burden on the population that they have to now address another set of hoops to jump through and rules to understand. And there's always the danger of possession now, because if you own it and then somebody knows about it, and you can get in trouble. It's all this madness that you think about. If pistols and suppressors were taken off the NFA list now and regulated no differently than they should be, which is like anything else that we have, how do you think how would you be able to change in a positive way? How do you think what positive impact would you predict that to have on manufacturing?
Well, one, that's probably 80% of sales that don't happen are caused by the tax stamp and the rules that the NFA has put out. So I think all suppressor companies would grow 80% overnight. I think they'd be very busy, which being a manufacturer of any kind in America, if we could grow all of our manufacturers in America by 80%, that's a great thing. That's 80% more jobs. That's 80% more use of materials. Because everything we make here in house is made in America. Our metal is American made. Our boxes, our sleeves. So it would help the economy. Is the bottom line. It helped local economies and the national economy. So that's what it do on a manufacturing front.
Yeah, imagine that deregulation might actually help the economy in this arena.
Say that again.
It was a bit snarky. I was saying, like, imagine that deregulation in this arena helping the economy. No one could possibly argue against that. And like,
imagine that. Yeah, you know what I mean. Like, let's not do anything for America. That'd be a bad thing.
No. Not to get too sardonic about it, but I'm curious then how you think that, like, because I've been looking at it this way, is in some ways these arbitrary rules that we've had to jump through have been the leading avenue of innovation in certain arenas, specifically around suppressors and braces. And because of that innovation, then the ATF has had to adapt to further regulate something which doesn't look good on the surface scale. It kind of shows that their intentions might not be as overt, or as their actual intentions may not be in alignment with the things that they claim to be.
I would completely agree on that, and that they've showed their colors on that. If they're really trying to protect the people and do the things that are best for the country, they're not achieving that in the manner that they're going after things. It's not working. I think they've showed their colors on that. And I mean, for one, for the braces, there's a 30 to 40 million in circulation, and they looked at all the crimes. There's data. There's more crimes committed with those type of weapons. I mean, it's just factual data, and they don't even look at it because the answer is no. It wasn't more brace killings or anything like that. It's not. The data is not there.
Yeah, but I think we've seen it in certain arenas. Data, from a philosophical understanding, like, the presence of data does not produce an imperative or a moral output. It just produces, it's just the context by which we exist to make decisions. So you could easily say it this way: every year, 4 braced pistols are used in violent crimes that involve. This is all metaphorical, or all theoretical, or it's all fictional. But every year, 4 braces are used in crimes that include the deaths of 3 or more people, resulting in 4 times 3, 12 deaths a year. And someone could look at that statistic and say, it's being used 4 times, therefore it's bad. And then whereas the other answer is, well, it's only being used 4 times, and there's 40 million of them in circulation. So you're talking about a 0.000000001 percent usage, and even then, it doesn't keep up with other statistics. And it's a game of evaluation, and that's where I think the trick is when we think about these things, is that we need to make sure we separate facts from evaluations. This is the information that we have, and this is the mechanism by which an evaluation is made. And so,
absolutely.
Because we've seen it time and time again. You saw it in 2013. We had this big push for all this control, and the arguments that were used were kind of silly and nonsensical, and so they very quickly kind of fell apart. And the people who made them were corrected, and then in 2018, those same people came out with the same old points, as if they didn't learn anything. We're here again. This is not a term. You're using it wrong, and we're just right back to that case again, where it seems cyclical in that sense of a bunch of foolish statements are made with political intent. They're corrected by people who know what they're talking about, who are truly know what they're talking about. So then the people, instead of changing their tone, just shut up for 6 months and then say the same thing again. And it's a dishonest, repetitive activity.
Absolutely.
So let me ask you this one then, is from the consumer side, and for some of the material, the kind of thought that goes into developing suppressors. I remember when the only thing I knew about suppressors was from video games, and so video games taught you that in its own way, that it kind of putting a suppressor on a gun makes it quieter, but you have less range, which, your bullet travels slower or something like that. And then I actually got to use suppressors and learn about them. What are some of the things that were that in the past common myths have been held, but you've seen them change and go away? Or what are common myths that you encounter today when it comes to suppressors?
Yeah, I think the first one is, that they're movie quiet. We use that term loosely, or video game quiet. Most suppressors, or most applications, are not that quiet. It's just a reduction. Especially rifle, centerfire rifle is, you're just going to get depending on the application, 20 to 40 dB reduction. And it's still 140 decibels, which is not quiet by any means. Does it make it hearing safe? Yes. Does it keep the ringing out of your ears and let you be able to continue to do what you were doing normally? In most applications, yes, it does. Secondly, that suppressors actually increase velocity. So a lot of people think it reduced it because the video game said it did, and all suppressors actually increase velocity, and there's just different ones that do it better than others. But like a centerfire rifle one would usually be 30 to 50 feet per second, depending on application increase. Our shotgun suppressor, we've seen upwards of 150 feet per second increase. That's probably the extreme side, where rimfire would probably be, maybe 15, 20, depending on the application. That'd be first thing. And then Second thing, I mean, I still get it all the time. Are they legal? People, I'd say a lot of people still think they're illegal. Like they didn't know they could buy one. It's kind of what people have been told, right? That's you can't have it. I get that all the time. I'm still blown away.
My grandfather fought in World War II and in Korea. And when I
Okay.
told him that I had a suppressor, he was more surprised at hearing that than hearing something like we have night vision. Now, some of that might be because night vision was a little outside of his imagination as he was getting older in years, but he was familiar with what a suppressor was. And for him to hear that I had one or that I could get one was completely like for him he was completely flabbergasted by that.
Hmm. It's interesting.
Now again he was in his elderly years and he was well
Yeah.
into his 90s at this point in time, but like for him that idea was just that it was impossible. You could never do that. You have one of those. This was his
Yeah.
kind of questioning, and it was interesting to hear that. So yeah, I mean, we have the legal side that makes sense from like an American question, and then we have some of the myths that people pick up on suppressors that are common from video games and movies, and even then we've seen like video games kind of get a lot better at this. Because I tend to I tend to spend more time if I'm going to watch it. If I'm going to be in front of a screen, I'm going to probably play a video game instead of watch a movie.
Yeah.
I tend to do that more often. So it's interesting to see how that influence has had, and especially in games like Call of Duty. Like we have what Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 is out right now, and when you put a suppressor on your gun in the game, it has some of them increase muzzle velocity, whereas like a long time ago, it was the 10 years ago, 12 years ago is the opposite. And I was like, oh well, I mean, I guess that makes sense if you're using subsonic ammunition, but we learned so much.
Yeah.
So what about from people within the gun culture who are already familiar with that? They're already familiar. They're already familiar with like they know how to get a suppressor, but they want to kind of sort through some decision making questions when it comes to buying one. What are some misconceptions that you tend to encounter?
I think, I got some here for sure.
Go ahead.
Um, I think the first one that I encounter the most is overbuilt. Um, People tend to want an overbuilt suppressor. There is some decent reasons to have that. It is a serialized item. They're not really bought and sold on the used market much, right? It's kind of like you buy it, you're gonna have it for a long time. But the only thing they have to go off of is what the military use, right? That's kind of where they're getting this idea from most of the time. Well, the guys in Afghanistan had them, or I seen it on SEAL Team 6 or whatever they watched, right? And they're like, well, what do they got? And they kind of backwards go from there to figure out what they need. Um, and then what I encounter the most is they're chasing something that's overbuilt and overpriced typically, because it was made for military application, like true military application. And a lot of times, I'd say the majority of the time, what they're doing is not a military application. Even if they're a freedom fighter and they want to be ready. Um, well, for instance, the weapons we served with, right? Let's say a Mark 18, or an M4. There's obviously better options out there right now than those. They were really good in their time, and we did move through a lot of stuff. And I have a Mark 18 behind me. I mean, right now. Um, but that doesn't mean it's the best for a civilian application, right? Or even for the warfighter here. The warfighter has more options. He doesn't just have to buy the green tip bullet, like we talked about earlier, right? He's not like, what bullets are we buying? The ones with green tips, 62 grain. No, we can buy whatever. We can have hollow points. We can have Sierra Match Kings. We can have whatever we want, right? And so that's kind of the first thing you kind of deal with is the overbuilt crowd. And so when they go to buy, though, then they find out it's really expensive, right? Because it's built for going to Mars and everything. It's built out of space metal, and it needs to survive 5 deployments from a 20-year-old, right?
Who's dragging it through the sand and
Yeah,
forgetting to tie it down and leaving it on the roadside and letting it get run over by a Bradley. Yeah, I mean,
bingo.
military guys know how to break shit. We just
We can
do.
break stuff, right? I mean, we are experts at breaking things. So, where on the other hand, I mean, when it's an issued item, you're gonna treat it different than a guy that probably looked into it for maybe a year or more, researched every model out there, finally ponied up the money, did all this fingerprint stuff, took a picture, paid $200 for a tax stamp. He's probably going to treat it a little different than I did on the invasion, right? Like it's just different. So what I say is like, don't, not all of them need to be built just for the military. There's a whole different sector here. There's a whole different set of options we can offer people. And that's kind of where you see my line on how I build my suppressors for JK Armament, and how I do it is more tailored to, if I get any option I want, I got it, right? I can change from a flash hider to a muzzle brake on the end cap. I can change the length. I can clean it, maintain it at my level. Um, I want it to be extremely light, because I'm not a 20-year-old running up mountains every day. You know, I'm a 40-year-old American, and light is right. That still applies, right? So I want it lightweight. I want it short. I want to be able to maintain it. So in the military, you don't get that option. Here's the green one, right? Like, this is the one you're going to use, buddy. Don't ask for a different color, right? Um, so that's where I'm, putting my. I'm trying to take care of the American people first, and being a military guy, I definitely care about everyone in greens, right? But right now, my focus is the American people and making sure they have tools to, for me, increase their lethality, save their hearing, um, knock down their signature, make sure their command and control is up, they can talk to each other. That's why I do what I do.
So I think I know the answer to this question, but I'm still going to ask it. Why did you stop doing the solvent trap? Why did you stop making those?
So legally, we could still continue to make them. We never got stopped, but the ATF quit approving Form 1s. And people that wanted to do it right, just how they were supposed to, and submit a Form 1 and get an approved suppressor build of any sort. It wasn't just what we were building or what Coca-Cola was building or what Rockstar was building. I mean, you could make this a suppressor, oil filters, you name it. They stopped them all. Um, and for us, if a customer couldn't convert something we were making legally, we stepped away from it until we can back that person up. So we'll see what 2024 brings as a country. I mean, you're seeing it every day. We got people trying to arrest our former president. That's pretty interesting. No matter who he is, or he, she, where they came from, to try to arrest a political candidate. It's pretty interesting for me to watch.
Yeah,
That's the big drive. It's the top-down drive. So
yeah, I don't imagine it's going to go over well. From a political perspective, I don't imagine it's going to be easy on the conscience. Let's just say, to look at it and go, yeah, we were the ones who did that thing. Like that, people will justify anything they want to themselves. They'll fight against their own conscience for sure. But I do not imagine that going down in a history book as a bright future kind of action.
No, I would completely agree. And so what I've learned being in this industry, and I should have took some notes from growing up. I actually grew up on a beef feedlot in Idaho, and it was actually shut down after I joined the military. I didn't know I was gone on deployment. Um, it was shut down by a three-letter agency called the EPA. Um, and they had their reasons. They had a variety of reasons why they thought they should shut it down, and large fines. From what I've been told, the fine was bigger than what the ranch was worth, and I also heard that it was who called the EPA on them was a competitor, and so they weaponized a or a government agency who shut down a long-standing World War II veteran-owned company. I know one of the men. I know two of the men very well. I'll say all three of them. I knew all three of them very well, and two of them went to World War II. One was in the Battle of the Bulge on a tank, had a Silver Star. The other one was 101st and did all the combat jumps in. And the younger brother missed World War II, but got to spend his time in the Marine Corps digging a foxhole in Korea, fighting the Chinese. And a competitor went after these guys through a government agency and put them out of business. Now, why I bring that up is that's kind of what we're seeing with current administration. And that's actually what drove the issues with the solvent trap. It was competitors using a three-letter agency to come after another competitor.
So I see this common in philosophy of violence, that and it will sound complicated because it is, and then it gets very, very straightforward very quickly. And what I see is I very frequently see a consistency amongst parties, not political parties exclusively, but within certain personalities, certain consistencies, to essentially use some other force, some other, usually a higher agency or a higher organization, in this case, like a governing body, to enact their will through malicious tinkering.
Yep.
And so you can see this in politics in one way or another. And there's a part of me that really does see this idea of the brace ruling being a cultural and political strategy to go after opponents, because despite what people try to portray it as, the idea of owning an AR-15 has been culturally identified as a right-wing idea. And so if we can hurt people who do that, we will be mostly hurting the other side, in quotes. And or in some ways it can be oftentimes attributed to a ethnic or cultural outcome. It's the privilege, it's the firearm of the privileged white male or something like that. And you can see it as, if we advocate for the organization, the government of some form, to attack a thing, what I can do is I can get my outcome without having to put risk on my shoulders.
Correct.
Yep.
It's McDonald's calling OSHA on Burger King.
Yeah, there's
And it's malicious, it's not right. It's not good for America, is the bottom line, in any industry or any political form. It's not the right way to do it.
So in some sense, if you were to describe the right and the left in the United States, they both have combinations of what we would refer to as a dignity culture and an honor culture. They both have different mixes of those two things. That's how, and like that's in many ways how I see it is that there's a lot of the tribalism of a sorts on what we see as like the American left right now, because there's a lot of circling of the wagons, and we just support the thing to support the thing. And you would, in it, if you were to paint that in a different light, you, and especially trying to pull away from the negativity of it, you'd call it loyalty. And that's not a bad trait to have.
No.
Whereas the right has a little bit more of this independence and then individual honor, where if you're going to say something, say it to my face mentality.
Yep.
Seems to be much more prevalent on the right. Whether or not they live up to that standard is going to be up for debate, but that's kind of a strong point. And so, if you were to say, so if we see this happening within the firearms industry, of people playing a form of lawfare, it's not even lawfare, it's something else, agent, the weaponizing of agencies for personal gain.
Yep.
We would want to criticize that pretty openly.
Yeah, it's hard to find out who did it, in each circumstance, who was the actual one that called. That's the hard part to find out. But there's people that let you know, and little birdies fly in and tell you things, and you can get tidbits here and there. Um, but what those people need called out and outed. And I will say there is one commonality I've seen, and I'm just gonna say it. I mean, because I've seen it. Um, there is definitely closet. Uh, I don't know what I want to call it. There's closet liberals, or people that aren't don't have our best interest in mind in the 2A community, operating in the 2A community. They're
There's
business owners, they're head CEOs of gun companies, they're working at gun companies, and they're doing it for financial gain, because at certain times the industry can make decent money, but they have no intent to preserve the rights of 2A individuals, and those are the ones that I've noticed. So they're internal, right? And they'll out someone else immediately because they're not in it for the right reasons anyways.
Do you think that's happening more often or less? Because 2020 seemed like a year where, as the riots picked up, a lot of the focus of gun culture was a broader reach, and so much so you started seeing things like or group identities of people who groups of people who typically identify with a very non-conservative position or non-Republican position, whether it would be, it doesn't matter. We just don't need to go down that road. But like, there seemed to be this door that was open for so many people, and gun culture invited them in with open arms. We'll use an example of um, when admin results was doxxed. He was doxxed by people who, outside of the gun culture, probably didn't have a lot in common with the people that they were in community with in this case.
Mm-hmm.
And so then the question arose, well, who's allowed within gun culture? And then we went back to, well, there's a difference between rights and communities and so forth. So do you think that it has happened more or less, where there are more foxes in the hen house, or less? Do you have any way to?
I would say on the corporate side, it didn't change. Those
Okay.
foxes are there. Um, on the American everyday side, everyday man, woman, it absolutely changed. I seen many people that wouldn't touch a gun before make sure they had a gun and got trained on how to use it. That was a huge shift. Um, and to be clear on the left and right thing, for me as a person, um, I'm coming up on 22 years in the Army, and I willfully fought for both sides. they're American. I have my views. I'm not pushing them on anyone, but they're mine, and I'll let them have theirs. Right? That's the way I think. It's freedom, liberty, the things we talk about that we preach. I believe in. They can have theirs. I can have mine. Um, and yeah, I think we did come together more than ever through those times, at least in our industry for sure. And that's a great thing to see, to be a part of. Um, and I'd probably just say it's the corporate, the guys at the corporate level. It probably doesn't matter what side of the fence they're on. They operate on a different set of morals. So either way, they're gonna do what's best for them. And if that's taking out another company and using a government agency to do it, they'll do it.
When you made the statement earlier, you said you saw a huge cultural shift on the ground level that may not have been as well represented or well reflected in the corporate structure.
Yes.
Wouldn't it then, to use a military term, wouldn't it behoove the corporate to reconsider the surety of their position? If anything else, the last 10 to 15 years have really shown that there is no company that is safe. There is no safety in, like, there is no security in that sense of resting on your laurels. The old names are now old names, and some of them chose to keep up with certain things, and some of them absolutely didn't, and it's cost them. Remington is no longer a company the same way that it was a company 20 years ago.
Yep.
So
No, it's really sad to see. I've been a part of that culture for a long time. One of my heroes is, John Browning. I mean, made in 1911, made the M2. I mean, the BAR. I mean, these are revolutionary items that are still in use. Um, John's dead, right? John's not here anymore, and it is still have family involved in it, things like that. It's a little um, more put together than like Remington, like you'd say, like. But old Remington, he's dead, right? I mean, he's dead. He's gone. They tried to hold on to what they had, but they exhausted the product life and didn't innovate, right? They tried to ride the product life until it died, and when it died, it was dead. And I'm a owner of many Remingtons myself. I mean, I grew up shooting a Remington 870 and I had a Remington 700. I mean, who didn't, right? And a Ruger 1022. I mean, that was kind of, at least where I'm from, that was basic Idaho, Southwest Idaho arsenal. Everyone had one, right? One for hunting, big game, one for birds, and then your Ruger for varmints. So it's just kind of gold standard, and it's really sad to see that go away. And it was just mismanaged, right? It was mismanaged at the corporate level with the wrong leaders and not putting investment in the right areas, which would have for them would have been R&D. They needed to keep creating new weapons to stay with the times, and they needed to make sure their manufacturing was good, and they didn't do that. They
yeah,
didn't
I
do
know.
that, and they got caught up in a couple lawsuits, and those weren't good. And pretty soon they don't exist anymore.
So what was it like transitioning from an innovator, an abstract object innovator in your corner, with moving from solvent traps, which I had one, or I have one, sorry. I didn't get rid of it. I have one. And I have one, and it was extremely useful for me in learning how, becoming more in tune with like the Form 1 process. And this was a while ago now. And to this day, it still is an excellent performing, legally possessed tool. It changed my perspective on the APC 9K. So I have it, and I put it on an APC 9K. And there was, when I first picked up an APC 9, I was intrigued by it as a firearm. I don't think the whole PCC, pistol caliber carbine, subgun. I never played with subguns in the military, so I never had any like a nostalgia for it. And then I wasn't shooting competition by the time PCCs were like the big thing. Or I kind of stepped back from competition at the time, right as PCCs were rising, so I never picked one up in that arena. But taking a solvent trap kit and deciding at some point in time that I wanted to turn it into a suppressor, because I held on to it for a while. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what I was going to do with myself. And then form wanting it, going through the legal process and making this tool, it changed the gun for me. And then it really changed my attitude in a couple of different things. And so you went from the solvent trap kits to making full Form 4 style suppressors. What was that transition like as as an individual, where you had to sort of, were you rebuilding a brand? What was it like? Because there was a sense of you recognizing that Form 1s were being shut down in a malicious way. You could have just thrown your hands up and quit.
Yeah, so there was probably, I'm going to say, 5 major solvent trap companies, right? And everyone was kind of getting to what was happening and getting similar signals. And as a businessman, I planned from day one to eventually make Form 4 suppressors, because I have history of doing that. When we changed, we opened up a whole new company. So this is a different company. We are using the same name, but it's a different company. But I will tell you, I'm kind of going back to what I seen or heard happen with the feedlot I grew up on, the ranch and the beef feedlot. They were older in their years. They were World War II vets. They didn't have a lot of their prosperity. There wasn't a lot of males or people that wanted to take over the business, right? So when that happened, to watch that fold and just shut down. And the other part of that story is the competitor that I think that got the agency involved is the new owner of that ranch, by the way. That gave me internal drive to not lay down. That was one of them, at least. So when this happened, I immediately was changing gears and saying, all right, we're going to go to phase 2, because it was a plan. I'm a military man, right? We don't just have one plan. We have additional plans ready to go. And we initiated it, but I will tell you, it was, it took right about 8 months from the start to full on, let's go, we're selling suppressors. It was an extremely long 8 months, because really everything had to start over. It is a new company. It's new boxes. It's new packaging. Every page on the website's different. It's a new manual. It's new programs on the CNCs. It's everything changed. It may have looked a little like, oh, it's just like flipping a light switch on the outside, but it wasn't. And maybe I even thought it would be a little bit easier. It was a push. It was a long push to convert over and to get all the proper paperwork right. The ATF didn't want to work very well with me. They didn't have they didn't know who I was, for one. They don't talk to you, right? It's not like, oh yeah, we know Jake, and yeah, this is what his background is, or this is what he does. I was just a guy, right? So I asked for a meeting, met with the director in our area, the regional director, and actually had a pretty good conversation and got to know her and said, hey, I need my license so I can do this, because they started holding my license, not renewing it, things like that. Because I have an FFL SOT and I always had prior to any of this. So that's the way they play games, right? They can hold up your paperwork or not approve forms, right? Which they legally can't do. I will say I learned a lot about agencies and how they operate. And I will say for sure, there is a lot of good people in the ATF. I was shocked. The guys on the ground, it's kind of like the troops on the ground, right? There's a lot of good people that will do anything for their country. Then you get one bad general, or on our side, Army side, or on their side, one bad director, which I found they're controlled by the DOJ. So what the DOJ says, their policy that they make gets pushed all the way down through, whether they like it or not. The same you see in the Army. We get all these things we have to do all of a sudden, and no one wants to do them. The commander doesn't want to do them. The first sergeant doesn't want to do them. Soldiers don't want to do them. Doesn't matter though. You have to comply is usually the common trend. Like, well, we got to knock it out, so let's get it done. That's what I found in the ATF. When you would ask an individual agent about a brace or a solvent trap, one, they didn't even want to hear about it. They were like, it gives them a black eye, right? As an individual, it makes them look bad. They're not hanging their head high to go home at night and see their wife and kids. Like, they're getting trashed every day. Did they make a choice on working there? Sure. But as all the directors over them, let's say in the last 10 years, had the same agenda? No. So it depends on who's in charge and what policies are pushed down from the top. And in loose terms, they get a gun held to their head, right? Do or die. Like, you got to do this or you're out. And some guys do. They're like, I'm out then. I'm done. Some people don't have the opportunity to just jump out, as we see in the military, right? They have to suck it up, and they're there for different reasons, and they have to abide by the system, right? Where others are like, I'm not getting the shot, I'm out, right? Or whatever the policy is at the time. So I see a big side of that because I had to work with them so much. It was honestly pretty awakening, and there's good people everywhere is what I found, right? It doesn't matter where they work, just same. We're dealing with the FBI right now, right? They don't really have the best name, I'm going to say right now. But I also know a lot of personal guys that worked in the FBI that are great dudes and would do anything for the country. So I just try not to put a blanket label on any agency or any group of people, because you just can't. It's like to say all Americans are good. They're not. There's great ones and there's bad ones.
Yeah, it seems to be a problem of centralization at this point in time. That I wonder if I am more willing to support this idea of decentralization because I see that the current centralized plan is not working. What I mean,
Yep.
or the current very centralized organization, the ATF being a federal organization, means it's inherently centralized. It has a headquarters, it has a headship and a leadership that is all monolithic and structured under the DOJ. And so there seems to be a sharp contrast between the will of the people in, say, where I'm at, Arizona, and the will of the people who are in a cubicle writing policy in West Virginia.
Absolutely.
And
Completely
so,
different. They're two completely different people. And
so
I would say every agent that has visited my facility, done inspections, regular ATF stuff, I've had zero issues with. They were actually good people. They're local here in Idaho. They live here. Um, they find bad guys. They do things. I know another lady that did compliance for us. Her dad was a door kicker for them. Great guy. Um, but yeah, there is a major disconnect from them to the policymaker, the guy in Virginia putting his will on them, right? And that's a problem.
Yeah, if we could separate that, it's almost like the centralized component has gotten too close to, as they like to say, the swamp. And it sounds, I mean, it comes across as inherently political, and we'll just kind of let it go that way. But I don't know if that's a new. I don't know if it's a new problem. It's just sort of, how long are we going to accept it as the status quo?
Right. And
That's,
and what do we do about it? And that's kind of that. I believe and have seen it just play out so many times in military units.
it
Leadership,
doesn't. That,
leadership. You got to have good leadership at the
yeah.
top, and mid-level leadership can influence and help. But good or bad leadership, clear at the top, can make a huge difference.
Yeah, I don't think it's a right or left issue. I mean, it right now, the right gets to hold on to it. And in 4 years, when the next president is, it can be a left leaning issue. And it just kind of
Yep.
seesaws back and forth. There's a little bit of irony in the sense that we have a hard time addressing policy from people who have no business writing policy. Like it just, maybe that's a letter of regress or a letter of redress that can be expanded upon. So
Yeah, and it's kind of the pool of people. I mean, it's become too much about a career rather than a sacrifice. Those positions were all made, they weren't convenient to do. It's not convenient to move to DC or Virginia and serve your country. It should be an inconvenience, and it should be a sacrifice to your normal everyday life. And you should do
yeah,
a time back there, put your blood, sweat, and tears into it, and pass it on to the next guy. And that is not happening. It's
I
a
don't,
go there and build your empire type thing, and look what I did, and try to get rich. I don't know. It's really
yeah,
weird.
I don't think we need, I don't think we need it as centralized as it is. There might be some form of communications and database hosting, but I don't think centralization is the answer. And,
No, it's
because I
not work.
mean, it's not a sacrifice to move to DC. It's a six-figure job guaranteed. I
Yep.
mean, I know that's going to come across as extremely crass. I know that's going to come across extremely fault. Like, I know not everyone who moves into the DC area is taking a six-figure job, but I don't think so many people are moving to the government or work in government and policy for anything less, especially with the cost of housing in the area and the economic benefits and the budget being passed and whatever. That's not, it's not solely a criticism in itself. It's a but it is a criticism of when your organization is failing to do its basic need, which is engage in the protection of the people with special skill sets and capabilities, and instead it's become, how do I set up my little fiefdom? Then we need to
Yeah.
make some changes, because I think I would agree with you. I'd be interested in theories on how, I'd be interested in hearing some theories on how we could change the structure of an organization like the ATF into something more beneficial. Is there a way that you can smash the tower and scatter it amongst the wind so that all the cities and all the states can't gain a little bit of that benefit that what the ATF is supposed to provide, without that monolithic center, that eye of Sauron trying to tell them what to do?
Yeah. I mean, my personal opinion is it needs broken up, and that funding that we were funding it with gets distributed out to local areas, and let the local county states go after the things they need to go after, because there is bad guys that are rolling up every day. That's a fact. There's people doing things they shouldn't be doing, that can inflict harm on regular civilians. That is just a fact. And I know that because I know guys that have rolled people up. And
I live in Arizona. We've had like trucks with RPGs, RPKs, PKMs,
yeah,
like that were smuggled into the country for the use of, whatever that,
yeah, it's
and that's
cartel stuff, right? It's simple. It's the cartel operating like ATF. They're involved in shutting that down, right?
mhm.
So if we just kill the ATF, well, who takes care of those guys, right? So it has to be a planned thing, but
I think there's a way
they're
out.
getting distracted with all this other crap. That's what I mean. You talk to the regular agent, and he's like, "A brace has nothing to do with what I do on a day-to-day basis. I don't care." That's his answer, right? He's like, "I don't care if a guy makes a suppressor or has one. Like, we're after the big guys, right?"
Yeah.
They were operating in areas when we had the riots. I know guys that, were chasing down guys that were um, what were they? Um, I can't think of the word, but
Like statues and stuff.
statues. Yeah, statues. Yep, specifically. And that's what they did. And those guys got hunted down. Now, does that ever make the news or anything? No.
No,
They ever bring it up? No.
no.
I just know because I knew the guy personally, and they hunted every one of them down.
Yeah,
And
I
it's
live.
cameras everywhere. They knew exactly who those guys were, and they got hunted down. But they don't. Did they get prosecuted? Probably not, because they're in the wrong state and they don't have the right prosecutors. Um, but to just dissolve something, um, the ATF does so much more than braces and solvent traps. That's just the fact. It's a distracting thing. They got bigger fish to fry. They need to stay focused on that. That would be the first thing to fix, and or dissolve them and let they do a better job by decentralizing it, like you said, and let people do what's best for them in their areas. Because Arizona, for instance, is going to probably need a lot more support than Utah, because Utah is surrounded by other states, right? It's not a bordering state. Um, but there's a real issue in Arizona and Texas with the border, and they need people stopping them and rolling these guys up. We need to keep
Yeah,
the streets clean, right?
there's a the thing that continues to draw attention is that there's a stark difference between a partially foreignly funded gang-like operation acquiring Glock switches, which are like the mechanism that allows you to disable the sear. There's a considerably vast difference between addressing a network like that and looking at something like an SBR or a pistol brace. It's like they're not really in the same category anymore. It really does feel like the ATF is still it's still living in the 1940s when it's trying to fight Capone or something. Well, I mean, he was in the 40s, but you get my point.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean that's how they started that, right? They were worried all the mobsters had SBRs and silencers, and so they made an NFA thing about it, right? And they thought that was the big fix, and it didn't stop one mob guy from shooting people down, like not even once.
no, but we'll see
Just
it
'cause there was
fixed.
a new piece of paper saying they couldn't do it didn't stop anybody. So it was a
Uh,
failed system right from the gate, right? I mean, right out of the gate, it didn't even work.
yeah,
Um,
it raises the question of what its intent was from the beginning.
yep,
So, well,
yep.
let's wrap this up for now. But one thing that is important to me is that I'd like to hear about some of the newer suppressors that you've come out with recently, because the one I up until recently I only ever knew of one shotgun suppressor and now it seems like you've changed the market once again.
Thank you. Yeah. So it's the JK 195. So the 195 is the diameter. SGX and Versa X12. We made two models. One is shorter and a little more affordable, good value. And the second one is full length. It's so you can have max suppression. But really, yeah, I went after some holes, some things that had never, I felt like, well, they could use some improvement, right? There was one out there. I just felt like I could maybe do a little better job. So I went after it. And it was a heck of a project. I will tell you, it was a 2 to 3 year project to get it where I wanted it. But there's a need. There's a need. It's just like all the rest. If you're out shooting and everyone's got a suppressor and one gun is not suppressed, it ruins the party, right? It just like, dude, why'd you do that for, right? So I'm looking in my safe and like, okay, so what in there is not suppressed? And for me, typically, real life, it was always the shotgun, and the second one was concealed carry pistol. Those were the two in my safe that I wasn't running cans on, like you were talking about a little earlier. That's the loose term, is a can, right? We call I feel like the guys that make them call them cans. It's kind of funny. And then
It's definitely a gun culture term, like
yeah,
100%. It's the
yeah,
oh yeah, you got a can on that, and they're like, and it's just another thing that we have. There's all
yep,
these terms that we use, and it's funny because they come and go. We've got, oh, he's a FUD. Night vision's a good example. A night vision unit. So like this one's by AGM. Uh, it's got it's got a housing. It's got an image intensifier in it, which is like a hockey puck, and then it's got
yep.
lenses. And we call the image intensifier the tube when the tube is the housing. And it's just, oh yeah, I've got some tubes. They're pretty. I got a tube,
Dudes, yeah.
pretty good, pretty good tube in this one.
Tubes and cans, right? That's what we
Yeah,
got, right? Yeah.
yeah, tube. Admin
Yeah.
results.
So the shotgun, that was I just kept looking in my safe and like, okay, concealed carry pistol used to not be suppressed, right? And the shotgun. I mean, that was the thing. It's like, okay, so why aren't these suppressed? And really it came down because suppressing those two weapons or weapon systems, whatever you want to call them, with current suppressors that were on the market was not practical. They were too
How
big, too heavy, not holsterable, too long, whatever you want to call it. They're just the ones that were out there were not practical.
you brought this up earlier, and you were talking about oftentimes the consumer is looking for a suppressor that's referred to as overbuilt. What does that mean to you?
So let's talk about shotgun, right? People, well, the current one that was built out of, had a lot of stainless steel in it, titanium, uh, different components. When you look at a shotgun and you look at the barrel thickness versus any other gun you own, it's extremely thin, right? Um, and there's a reason it doesn't need to be thick, right? They could have just made it thick like all the rest of them, but it's not. It's different. And so when you design a shotgun suppressor, it doesn't need to be like the rest of the suppressors, overbuilt, heavy. It can be extremely thin. It can be out of different materials. Um, and like ours is all 70-75 aluminum. It's full auto rated on a 7-inch shotgun. I mean, what more could you ask for, right? So it doesn't need to be overbuilt. That's what I mean by that. But there's a lot of scare out there, like, well, will this, outlast um, the end of time, and it's like, yeah, it actually will, for one. For two, you can't buy or carry enough ammo to wear it out. That's a fact. But oftentimes, I guess kind of the way I've seen it happen, this is just through experience. A lot of cans, suppressors get designed and built to sustain demos at gun shows. So we call
Interesting.
we call it the Disneyland thing, right? So you go to a gun event, you set up one, and all these people come and they want to shoot your product, right?
Yeah.
And you have a guy standing there, and he's got the weapon, and he's got mags loaded, and there's even a guy jamming mags, and a guy comes up and he gets 5 rounds, wham, 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 right? He shoots it, passes it to the next guy. And depending on how good your ride is at Disneyland, there's a big line. And that does that for 2 to 3 days. Now, if there's a failure point during that Disneyland ride, it looks really negative for the company. Like, oh, that can launched. Oh, that one came apart, whatever, right? If it fails. So I've watched this carefully. So people will overbuild their cans so they make sure they last that line, which is not a standard application for military, law enforcement, or a civilian. No one stands behind me and hands me mags every time I reach back for 3 days. That's not normal use.
Not at all. Yeah, I was looking to see. I was looking for, a couple of data points in regards to places I've seen shotguns use suppressors, and I was like, kind of. I was trying to find to see if I could pull up any like references, like cultural references where they'd been used, and outside of, like, I think Grand Thumb, Call of Duty, and No Country for Old Men. I wasn't able to pull anything up really quickly.
There's not a
But
lot. Yeah, I think you got him right there. Yep.
yeah,
John
and
Wick, right? Yeah.
did John Wick end up using a suppressor on a shotgun?
Nope. So he had it for the movie, but they wanted the boom. They wanted the noise
Oh,
because it was Hollywood, right?
yep.
They were going for the boom, so it didn't actually get used in the movie. It had our mount on it, so it was ready, JK ready, but did not actually use it. So Grandwick used it in the remake, right? So
I still
uh,
love that guy. He's got
yeah,
the
he's
best.
great.
He's got the best worst sense of humor. So
Oh, it's hilarious. Yeah.
yeah,
He's very smart, very witty. It's hard to keep up with him sometimes.
it's the way
He is a good time to be around, that's for sure.
it's the way it should be. So
Yep. Yep. But yeah, the shotguns, it's a new hole. It hadn't quite been done right. People want them short, light. Um, but I definitely threw it into it's a special use application. As a shotgun always has been. It's a tool, right? It's a crowbar.
yeah,
Uh, and so you can't overbuild it. You need it to be short, you need it to be light. Um, and that's where we kept it. And it's done really well for us. It seemed to be a good hole. And then the second one was the CCX for the concealed carry pistol. And it also came through practicality. Me and my family and people I know are all carrying around these little short pistols, and we train on a flat range. Um, we get very comfortable with the pistol, and it's all with hearing protection on, right? And the light bulb moment for me was, I got my wife this pistol. She's got it. First time she has to draw it and use it in self defense and fires it, she's definitely not going to have ear pro in, and she's probably going to drop it because it's so loud.
yeah. I
And
mean, that
it's just and a little backstory on her, I guess. My wife specifically, she plays the piano. She has a really good ear. I turn up the radio too loud in the pickup, it hurts her ears, right? Like she has sensitive hearing.
a piano, classic or contemporary.
Yeah, dang, I don't know. I don't know. She has a grand piano, a baby grand. I don't
Most
know what
likely,
that means. She
most
can
likely
play the
classic.
piano.
Yeah.
Classic, yeah. She's really good at it. She has the ear for it, and, so that's twofold. One, she's so sensitive when she shoots it, it's gonna hurt. I guarantee it. It hurts when I turn the radio up. It's gonna hurt when she fires her 365 SIG in close proximity or in a vehicle. It's gonna hurt. 2, it's definitely gonna damage her hearing, which she counts on to do it. She does, right? Um, that was a problem for me, and I'm like, okay, there is a solution that's small, light, and holsterable that we can do for these. Um, is it movie quiet? No. Is it hearing safe in full length? Sure it is. Is it hearing safe, shorter, wet? Dang right. So it fits the bill, right? You don't have to overbuild. I don't need a suppressor this long on a pistol this long. It's not practical. And that's why in my safe, I didn't have one on there, right? Yeah, I have pistol suppressors, but then I'd take them off and they'd end up being used on PCCs, subguns, things like that, right?
How much of an exact science is running a pistol wet like? How much of that is something that's just it's just something because I've never done it. I've never had reason to. Let's put it that way. But this
So, oh, go ahead.
it like that's running a pistol wet, or I'm sorry, running a suppressor wet is sort of in the mystical room for me. Like I'm not really entirely sure. I'm not confident I know what that means and how to even do it.
Okay,
And
so
if it's
for us, yeah, for me, you running it wet can be pouring water in it, spraying WD-40 in it. We've put suntan lotion spray in there. We've put axle grease. Um, Back in the gym tech days, we'd use wipes and grease, petroleum jelly. There's many ways to get it wet, but it needs to be a liquid, preferably one that doesn't make it sticky. So yeah, you could put Dr. Pepper in there, right? But after it burns off, it's going to be really sticky, right? So you want something that doesn't leave sticky residue behind, I'd say is first rule. Second rule, I feel like it needs to be pre-packed, not something you do on the fly, like, hey, bad guy, let me pour some water in here. Now I'm going to shoot you. So that's where things like petroleum jelly come into play, where you can pre-pack it like you'd pre-lube a weapon, and then it's ready for use, right? And that's how we do it. We pre-pack it, it's ready for use. And that also, but that also lends itself to having a mission configurable type suppressor where you can take it apart and apply it where needed, put it back together. So these welded together ones, things like that, they're not always able to do that, right?
yeah, that makes sense. So I because I'm thinking about this is like, so you can take a CCX and you can choose the baffle stack length.
Correct.
And so if you're gonna if you the idea of putting that on the end of a pistol and concealing it at like the um, front corner, your appendix carry of sorts,
And scary. Yep.
seems like for someone with a shorter torso that'd be kind of difficult. But then if you do it in full length configuration, but you can also so your idea would be running it shorter, a shorter configuration with a petroleum jelly run through it so that it's going to be a little bit quieter still. And then that puts it in the it's always ready, but it's still suppressed and it's user configurable category.
Yep.
Now,
Absolutely.
have you had any issues with to make it sound intimate and sketchy? Things like petroleum jelly getting warm and running out of the suppressor because it's in your clothing, it's in your tucked in your pants against the heat of your body all the time? Or is
So
that
yeah, that depends on how people carry it. And if they did do that, they would probably want to come up with a wipe, or I mean, you could get crafty and think about the ways like, yeah, the war on terror. Couple deployments in, you're eating dirt all the time. Pretty soon they make a little dust cap for the end of your M4, right? Keeps the dirt out. So, or like what we did growing up hunting, we'd put a little piece of tape over it, right? So there's a lot of ways you can modify it for your application if that's really what you're doing. Um, so that's probably what I'd recommend, a piece of tape or something, and you'd probably be just fine. Or run it dry. You don't have to run it wet. It is better wet. Um, it has two major benefits. Wet will drop I'd say, depending on the length, you could be 5 to 10 dB difference. And then it does help to clean it. When you go to clean carbon off it, it wipes right off because it was oiled, right? So the carbon isn't adhering to the material um, like it would be dry. Um, but it's not mandatory. But those are the ways I'd probably do that. There's a lot of guys using it as a bedside gun. A lot of guys using it in the door of their pickup. It's ready to go. So it really just depends on how you're carrying it.
Very much
But
so, yeah.
again, it's like from having it to not having it. That's what I felt on the invasion of Iraq and then going into SOF. Huge drastic difference, right?
Mhm.
Suppressed or unsuppressed, that's a big jump. No matter what the suppressor is, because as you know, a lot of those suppressors we had back then, they weren't great. Wasn't like they weren't really quiet. They did the job, but and that's kind of what the bottom line is. They did the
Yeah.
job, right? It
And
was
it,
better than not.
and if they were great, by the time I got my hands on a Knights that was used overseas, that I was using overseas, I don't know how many rounds went through that thing. I don't know how
Right,
much lead it
right.
had.
Could have been
Cake.
shot out. Yeah, you name
Yeah.
it, right?
So, but of course, it's your first experience, and so you're just trying to figure it out, and so that's
Yep.
quite neat. Well, great. This is this has been a really fun conversation. Just hearing you talk about just like kind of how suppressors came to be, especially in the last couple of years. I mean, it's it's a neat. It's I think it's I'd like to see them more often, and I think that I'm glad to be around at a time when they've become nearly ubiquitous. They're very common, and so we're getting closer and closer.
Yep.
But yeah, well, then, where do people find you? Where's the best place to pick up your equipment to look at your suppressors? Where's the especially that you're focusing on the civilian, like I said, I have a 9mm suppressor from you that I love. It's been fantastic. I've been using it for a couple of years now, and I've never once been I never once lost confidence in its capabilities. And so, that being the case, where do people find you?
We could be found in many different areas. Our main channel is distribution. We use Silencer Shop a lot.
Hmm.
They're a great partner with us. We also have a lot of different dealers that do a really good job for us out there. Um, and we also have product on our website. So that's jkarmament.com. And then we're also on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. We're on all the platforms. So look for us there. Um, yeah, we'd love to have your business, and we appreciate all the American support out there, and keep fighting the good fight is what I'd say. So
Yeah, I think we're going to be just fine. I think we're going to come out of this. It's always darkest before the dawn, and 2023 is going to be has been kind of a rough year for lots of us. 2024, I think we need to get ready for 2024 to be really tough. And it may not be tough like economically, but it's going to be tough mentally and emotionally. Like we're going to see a lot of things that are going to leave us a little shell shocked. And they may not be grandiose, but it's probably not going to get better immediately.
no, there can't. Yeah, no, I'm not. I am a very upbeat, positive person, but it's gonna get tough. It's gonna get tough, but that makes us strong, right? So we just the biggest thing, and I think our strength in America is when we stick together.
Yeah,
We
we'll
need
do.
to fight together, and that's what makes us great. And when we get separated by small politics, or I don't like this color, or whatever you want to call it, um, that's what'll get us. We separate, we will lose.
Every time.
Well,
Well,
thanks for
good.
having me on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I've enjoyed this conversation just listening to you talk, because I know I've known you, or I've known of you for a while, and I finally got to meet you at SHOT Show briefly. And I've been looking forward to this conversation for damn near 6 months now. And I'm really glad to have you on. We'll have you on again sometime for sure. But it's good to hear you talk about just coming from the manufacturing side of suppressors and looking at it at different ways, where I might be approaching it from a cultural and end user application. There's so much more that goes into it, even though on some sense a suppressor can be thought of as a rather simple device. But there's so much more that goes into it than we want to forget. And next time we'll get into maybe how our understanding of how a suppressor interacts with a gun has changed how we've designed firearms and suppressors themselves.
Yeah, that'd be great.
It goes from I remember a deployment where I came back got back to my room after a heavy day of using the gun, and I had a black side of my face just from all the carbon spraying out into me.
Yeah.
And I had a clean side and a dirty side. And it's like, oh, well, this is how it goes, I guess.
Yep.
And we've come so far since then. So,
Yeah,
well,
absolutely.
Well, Jake, it's great to have you on. It's great to hear from you. As far as it goes here, this is, for those who are still listening, this is the Redacted Culture Cast. Our focus is always to push into a little bit more of the nuanced and deeper conversations, oftentimes surrounding gun culture, but it can move around. So thank you for listening. Thank you for being a part of the show. And if you want to support us, you can head over to redactedculture.locals.com. We're going to have some more backside conversations about things that are going on and it's not backside. I got to call it something else. We'll just call it the black site. That's still what we call it. We're going to have our own conversations behind the door. And so that's where you can help us out too. Keep the show running as we explore the future of gun culture. So thank you for listening, and we will talk to you soon. Also, get a suppressor and keep your hatchet sharp and your powder dry.